Hi, my name is Zachary Angela, and I'm going to be going over the continuation of creating neural networks, sort of ago. Um, so, I think last time I sort of went over this a little bit with part two, and kind of went over the certain vocabulary of it, and then a little bit of filtering and everything. I just wanted to start off maybe with basics, and then try to get a little more complex again. And that's just going to be a central theme in what I'm doing with these videos and articles. Um, Partially because repetition, kind of like a neural network, helps learn. The other part is that it's really complicated. You can go down a deep end with any one of these parts, kind of like how any kind of programming paradigm is. But I guess, use my discretion on how that's going to be, and it doesn't always mean the best or that I'm some kind of authority, but it just, that's just how no matter what you do, if you put any information into stone, it's going to become, worthless after so much time. So, the end of 2025, take it for what you will. So anyways, enough of that pre-information. We'll get kind of into it a bit more. The reason why I kind of do these vocabs is because I just want eyes on the words, just so that when you come across it in code, you're not just completely lost, or there's no kind of preliminary understanding of kind of what's going on. Because the more you put these in your head, the more, when you look at the code, it becomes simplified, right? So we kind of went over forward pass. That's sort of, it could kind of be the initialization, but it could also be the guess or prediction, however you want to call it. The loss with the disappointment is sort of that minus equation, the prediction minus the target. The backward pass is the blame. Weights, that's part of, I guess you could say, the forward pass in a sense, depending upon how many layers there are. But it's sort of part of the initialization or the prediction, because you got to pull those values from somewhere. The ReLU is, I don't know how to pronounce that necessarily, but I'm just saying it's that is the part of the filtering. So is the dropout. Dropout's really random. A dissection of neurons. So it's sort of a complicated thing because you're literally only making part of your program work, right? And then softmax is just heavier filtering. That's it. And I think this sort of chain of command thing makes sense for right now. When I go over in the future, and I'll kind of glance near the end of this over that, is when you get into actual the NLP or the generating of a word, this sort of loses meaning because you're trying to get to a goal, and I guess you're focusing more on the work, even though you're using all of them. It's sort of like when you go up to a business and you see the painters, you don't really see the CEO, right? This stuff is still simple, and it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense when you look at it. Eventually that's going to change when you get into matrices and actually real world stuff. But the concepts of these, I think, is important, so that when there's a little problem with something, you can pick out or know what it is you're digging into. It's not so important to be able to see the code and be like, oh yeah, I have a full mental model of this. Like that's not why I wrote this. Although it helps for learning, it's not in real world a goal that you're going to be able to accomplish. Like, that's just not, maybe there's someone smart enough, I don't know, but that's not me. um and the reason why I'm going over multiple layers is because I'm trying to get you ready for complexity, right? The idea that it isn't just a couple lines. It's a whole bunch of errors in math and things going on that you're gonna be like, oh, man, that's okay. That's why this works as a neural network. It's not a person. It's not some math equation that you're. I mean, it can be a math equation, but that would be a little ridiculous in code. I just mean that it's a way. It's kind of like running a web server with a database and all these middleware, and nobody has it all going on in their head or be able to explain it in simple terms. It's just how it ends up, and that's why it is useful, right? Otherwise it would just be like, oh, write it down and I'll get the answer, or I'll use a calculator. Well, things are a lot more complicated than that, in reality. So yeah, you do a lot of filtering. You get some errors, and from the errors, you nudge the values of the weights and biases, and you would rerun it again. And that's why I put examples here so that you can run it again, and get an idea of what it is you're attempting to do, even if it may not seem right. And that's why I introduced other filtering strategies in order to make it seem more right. But it adds more complexity, right? Even if it's just like some weird random thing that really isn't that complicated, but you're doing what you can because your code may be doing a lot, but you need to find out what's wrong, what is going on with this, why am I doing this. And even if you think you're doing all the right steps, and as you're kind of learning this and going over it, I definitely suggest you use Gemini to pick apart things. And if you do help me learn, what is a neural network, and your way of doing this is going to be different from mine, only because you may do different information, you may have queried different things, and they're trying to learn about you, right? And so your output of this is going to be different from my output of that. And that's kind of the point of this neural network stuff, is you're able to cover cases that you wouldn't have thought of. It's kind of like someone saying, well, I should be able to type whatever the hell I want. And if you don't have this extra ability to have context, good luck, trying to do every variation. Even in a neural network world, you're not going to get every variation, but you're going to be able to snare contextual understanding of things so that it kind of makes it seem like you did. And that's the real benefit of all this and NLP and everything. And that's the golden nugget. That's what's supposed to make you go, oh, wow, this is the greatest thing ever. Yeah. Anyways, so yeah, it gets complicated, and you do more filtering, so on and so forth. And when you do the more filtering, things start to look a little bit better, right? It's not the most complicated filtering, obviously, as you can tell. So, I'm kind of trying to understand, how to break things down in a simpler form with doing this, to me. just because it starts to get really complicated, but things become a lot more real, right? And that's sort of the point. And so when you do this, and you get you're working in a higher level, but then a lot of the magic starts to kind of go away, right? Um, and that's why I kind of introduce these sort of concepts in a different light, and it's going to get more weird because as things get more complicated, I'm going to have to resort to more different wording and maybe more funny stuff or goofy stuff. But anyways, the one thing that sort of got me onto this or started my curiosity was this concept right here. This doesn't seem like much. This seems like, a very bare basic, money, organization, person, location. This sort of made me think that, because I think I always, before all this, thought in terms of objects, right? But this NLP stuff sort of made me realize it's just text. And that extra meaning could be whatever the heck you want it to be. And that sort of ballooned up my thinking of using Go and NLP, because I'm not saying traits or types. I'm saying the idea of simplicity, but dealing with really complicated ideas. But those complicated ideas are just text. And it's kind of like when, Rob Pike and them created Ghost Spin or whatever, where they're kind of trying to do, it's not a file system, but it can act like one, and you have namespaces, and it's just text, and you would join their server, or not join it, but you would send up maybe your email, and that would allow certain things, and where these categories are just text. That's all it is. It's not Google Drive, it's just text. And I think that really, made me jump at this concept really hard, or maybe spot it, or whatever you want to call it. And I think for some people that may not do it for them. Maybe they just think, yeah, it's an organization. Okay. Well, the idea that you can take conceptual objects as just text and let the user define what that means while not making things complicated is, I think, a crazy concept to me that really blew me away. It just, I don't know, that really blew me away. And maybe to some older experienced programmers, well, search filter. Yeah, technically you're right, but it's a concept of complexity that's covered by simplicity, that's only filtered or searched by context, that can give extra meaning to how you mostly interact with the computer. And there's just a whole lot behind what that means. Like a whole lot. And I think people don't see that. Like they could just go, oh yeah, it's just code, it's just a slice. I don't get it. But being able to simplify things and be able to grab or allow others to grab in your code as some abstract concept, but keep it all simple, is just, I don't know. Anyways, to continue on, I kind of get into matrices and a bunch of nested for loops just because visually that's what you're kind of working with. And see, I slowly try to introduce complexity into how things work and why. I try to kind of repeat things in a certain sense, because to me it is important to repeat it. And I'm working on this, and I might have to brush up part 2 because I made some mistakes there, but because I want to keep the flow simple. It really has nothing to do with how people think of me or what they think about what I write or do. I could care less. It's, to me, the space of knowledge needs to not just be like simple or simplified or anything like that. It's the direction that matters more to me than anything else, because I could go off the rails. And I kind of get into that a little bit here, where I'm like, this right here, the evolution or history of NLP models, but I don't dig into them. This is as far as this thing goes. I will attempt to get a little more examples of the MOE model, just because working with it, as you may have or may not have watched my other videos, trying to do the other models like BERT and BART and all that, boy, is that complicated. You'll waste so much time. Doesn't mean they don't have their role, but doing the MOE, the mixture of experts, wow, that is a simplification of getting what you want without using up all the resources while still keeping things simple to maintain. Yeah, it really is a masterpiece. It's like when I was first exposed to Go. It's like, I was trying to. It's like I was trying to put JavaScript into the playground, and I was like, "Oh, why isn't this working? This is stupid," And then I realized, oh, okay, well, the difference of these are huge, and one allows me to actually understand what's going on and why, and be able to pick it apart and everything. And that's why I emphasize it so much here, because it really, really is a big deal. And I attempt to do, I don't necessarily do all the matrices stuff, but I attempt to break down I wouldn't say real world example, but it's more of rubber meets the road than just some matrices with some numbers and some guesses. Ish. I don't totally cross that line, but I attempt to, as you can see. And then I show a real like loop thing, and then I compare it to tensors, which I honestly don't know which one's easier or more complex, but yeah, take it for what you will. I don't say you have to use this one example. It's not like comparing BERT to MOE, right? It's just a different way of doing things. And, of course, when things get more complicated and you want more real-world stuff, you have to have real-world, filtering and searching. And this is a really, really simplification of it. This isn't actually predicting too much, but it's just a more real-world version. And I will eventually get into trying to make this more, where I'm combining the concepts of matrices and trying to predict and trying maybe to somehow introduce the MOE into there, and so that you could eventually create something actually kind of useful instead of just this like where it almost seems like theory or you're learning vocabulary. The ultimate goal is so that you can get to, well, my program that I had made, and so that you can have contextual understanding of your input. I mean, that's really the goal, right? Kind of like an LLM, sort of, where you type in stuff and it kind of can understand it. You're not going to get to this point. That's a whole huge thing. But you're going to attempt to use parts of it, and probably the best parts, so that you can implement it into your own whatever. I was thinking the other day, maybe web server, instead of doing templates, it would interpret the text, and then, yeah, I mean, you got to show some representation, but that representation will be based off the context, which might get a little weird. But I think if you have a standardized kind of like JSON, because your model is going to need it anyways. You can't just throw in bucks and get out sentences. You're going to have some structured data for whatever goal you're trying to accomplish. Like, let's say it's generating commands or generating code or making web pages or whatever it is. You're going to have these things that your program is going to have to fill out and guess based upon the input. I mean, that's just how that's going to have to go. And when you can do that, and do that well, you can have some really interesting. Maybe have some that has different headers and footers and widgets and whatever else, and so that you don't necessarily have to spend as much time on the front end, which visually people like, but working on it, people don't necessarily like. At least not in the real world, they don't. So you get away from frameworks and all that crap, and versioning, and there's a lot of things you can do with it, especially with a web server or whatever. But yeah, that's kind of the goal. That's kind of what I've been working on. That's why I've been working on it. That's why you should be interested in it, and that's why I'm doing it. All right. If you have any questions, please let me know. Okay.